I am Ethan Vance, 34 years old. Exactly 1 month ago, the woman who gave birth to me slapped me across the face with such vicious force that my glasses flew off and shattered against the cold marble floor of the Grand View Hotel ballroom. I was standing in front of 200 people. Family, friends, business associates. And while I was standing there, trying to process the ringing in my ears, my parents demanded I hand over the keys to my $2 million penthouse to my younger brother. They actually looked me in the eye and said, "You are a disgrace to this family. Give your brother the keys right now. He deserves it more than you." They laughed at my silence, mocking me while 200 pairs of eyes stared me down. But there was one massive thing they did not know. They thought I was just some mid-level corporate drone living in a rented box. They had absolutely no idea about my actual salary, my real estate portfolio, or the fact that I was the senior vice president of acquisitions at the very firm that controlled their entire financial existence. And right now, as I record this, they are begging for my forgiveness while facing complete financial ruin. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their perfect illusion and took back my dignity, hit that like button if you believe in standing up for justice against toxic family members. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything to me. Now, let us go back to where this nightmare truly began. The sound of my glasses cracking against the marble was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a sharp, final sound, like a bone snapping in a quiet room. For a fraction of a second, the entire ballroom went completely silent. The jazz band that had been playing a soft rendition of a classic love song abruptly stopped, the saxophone letting out a pathetic squeak before dying away. The waiters, dressed in crisp white jackets, froze in their tracks with their heavy silver trays of champagne suspended in midair. I stood there, feeling the sudden, intense burning red mark spreading across my left cheek. I did not raise my hand to touch it. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked at my mother, Eleanor. She was still breathing heavily, her chest heaving under her expensive beaded gown. Her hand was still suspended in the air, her fingers slightly curled, as if she could not quite believe she had actually made contact. But her face told a different story. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated entitlement and rage. She looked at me not like a mother looking at her son, but like a master looking at a disobedient servant who had dared to speak out of turn. Beside her stood my father, Arthur, his chest puffed out like a proud rooster, his jaw set in a hard line. He was waiting for me to submit. He was waiting for the public humiliation to break my spirit, just like he had tried to break it behind closed doors for my entire life. And right behind them was Julian, my golden child younger brother, wearing a custom velvet tuxedo that I had secretly paid for. He was trying to look like a victim, his eyes wide, his hands slightly raised as if he was the one being attacked. It was a pathetic, transparent performance, but it was the performance my parents had always bought. I looked down at the shattered frames of my glasses. They were a designer pair I had bought in Milan after closing a massive corporate merger. A small reward to myself for months of sleepless nights. Now they were just broken glass and twisted metal scattered on a highly polished dance floor. The physical loss meant nothing to me. I could buy 100 more pairs tomorrow without blinking. But the symbolism of those broken lenses resting on the floor of my brother's wedding reception was profound. They represented the final, irreparable shattering of my family. I slowly bent down. My movements were deliberate, unhurried. I picked up the sharp pieces of glass and the bent metal frames, ignoring the tiny cut that opened on my index finger. I slipped the broken pieces into the breast pocket of my suit. The sheer silence of the room was suffocating. I could hear the heavy breathing of a relative 2 tables away. I looked directly into my mother's eyes. I searched them for even a fraction of a second of regret. I searched for a flicker of maternal love, a sudden realization that she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I saw nothing. I only saw a tyrant waiting for her subject to kneel. I turned around and walked away. I did not run. I walked with the slow, measured pace of a man who has just been set free from a lifelong prison sentence. I kept my head high, my shoulders back, my posture rigid. I felt the gaze of 200 people burning into my back, but their judgment meant nothing to me anymore. They were witnesses to my liberation. The heavy wooden doors of the ballroom loomed ahead. I pushed them open with both hands, stepping out into the hushed, dimly lit corridor of the hotel. The moment the doors closed behind me, cutting off the sudden, chaotic eruption of whispers, gasps, and frantic voices inside the room, I pulled out my phone. My vision was slightly blurry without my glasses, the edges of the hallway softening into a hazy glow, but I knew the number by heart. I dialed Victor Sterling. Victor was not just a billionaire CEO. He was my mentor, my boss, and the man who had taught me everything I knew about leverage, power, and consequence management. He had seen the scars my family left on me long before this night. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp and alert. I kept my voice deadpan, betraying absolutely zero emotion. "Victor, it is Ethan. Green light. Execute the contingency plan." Victor paused for only a second. He knew exactly what that meant. We had prepared for this very moment months ago, when I first suspected my family was planning something drastic regarding my assets. I had prayed to God we would never have to use it. "Are you injured?" "Just my pride, and a pair of Tom Ford frames," I replied, my shoes sinking slightly into the plush carpet of the hallway as I walked toward the main lobby. They tried to force the asset transfer in public. Mom got physical. I could hear the ice forming in Victor's voice over the phone. He despised bullies. "Give me 1 hour, Ethan. I am bringing James from the legal department. We are coming to the reception. Make sure they see you," I said, my voice hardening. "Oh, they will see me," Victor promised. "I am bringing the shareholder agreement, the one Arthur signed without reading the morality clause." I hung up the phone and walked out into the crisp evening air. The valet looked at my red cheek, his eyes widening briefly before he quickly looked away, strictly maintaining his professional demeanor. I handed him my ticket. As I waited for my car, I felt a strange, overwhelming sense of absolute calm wash over me. For 34 years I had played their game. I had tried to buy their love, earn their respect, and prove my worth. I thought the worst of the humiliation was behind me. I was so incredibly wrong. To understand why a mother would strike her own son over a piece of real estate, you have to understand the sick dynamics of the Vance family. Growing up in our suburban house, the rules were unspoken but absolute. Julian was the son, and I was just the cold, empty space orbiting around him. I am 6 years older than Julian. When I was in high school, I maintained a perfect GPA, captained the debate team, and worked weekends at a local grocery store to save money. I did everything by the book because I genuinely believed that if I was perfect, they would finally look at me the way they looked at him. When I brought home my straight-A report card, my father would barely glance at it over his newspaper. He would give a generic nod, maybe grunt in acknowledgement, and then immediately tell me to go mow the lawn or clean out the garage. But when Julian managed to bring home a D- in basic algebra, avoiding a failing grade by the absolute skin of his teeth, my mother would bake a cake. She would throw a family dinner to celebrate his hard work and his creative spirit. She would loudly proclaim that grades did not measure true intelligence. I learned early on that my achievements were expected, but my existence was an inconvenience. My parents owned a mid-sized manufacturing supply company. They made decent money, certainly enough to live in a nice neighborhood with a strict HOA, drive relatively new cars, and take annual vacations to Florida. But when it came time for me to go to college, my father sat me down at the kitchen table. I remember the exact smell of that morning, stale coffee and my mother's overpowering floral perfume. He looked me in the eye and told me the college fund they had promised me for 18 years was gone. He said business had been tough, the economy was shifting, and they needed to reinvest the money into the company to keep the family afloat. He framed it as a sacrifice I needed to make for the greater good of the family name. I nodded, swallowed my rising panic, and took out massive student loans. I worked night shifts as a security guard at a warehouse just to pay for my textbooks and instant noodles. I slept 4 hours a night for 4 years. 5 years later, When Julian barely got accepted into a mediocre state college, the narrative miraculously changed. My parents suddenly found the money to pay his tuition in full. They bought him a brand new car as a going-away present, and they covered his luxury off-campus apartment, so he would not have to suffer the indignity of living in a cramped dorm. I found out about this during a Thanksgiving dinner. I was eating a slice of dry turkey, utterly exhausted from working a double shift the day before, when my mother loudly bragged to Aunt Beatrice about how they were ensuring Julian did not start his life burdened by debt. I looked at my father, waiting for an explanation. He just shrugged, cut his roast beef, and said Julian needed a head start because he was more creative than me and less equipped to handle the harsh realities of the corporate world. That was the day the last drop of warmth I had for them evaporated. I stopped trying to impress them. I moved to the city, got an entry-level job at Victor Sterling's investment firm, and dedicated my life to outworking everyone in the room. Over the next decade, I climbed the corporate ladder with ruthless, calculated efficiency. I made partner by 30. I handled multi-million-dollar acquisitions. I wiped out my student debt in a single, massive bonus check. But to my family, I was still just Ethan, the boring, single guy who lived in the city. The guy who missed family dinners because he was always working. I never corrected them. I let them believe I was a struggling middle manager making a mediocre salary. I did not want them looking at my bank accounts. I had seen how they treated relatives with money. They viewed them as walking ATM machines, obligated to fund the mistakes of the less responsible family members. This brings us to the family gathering 1 week before the wedding. My parents hosted a large barbecue in their backyard to welcome Chloe's family. The entire extended family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen since the last funeral. I drove my Porsche 911 down from the city, but I deliberately parked it 3 blocks away in a dimly lit Walmart parking lot and walked the rest of the way to their house. I wore a plain gray sweater and old jeans. I wanted to blend into the background. I was sitting on the patio, quietly sipping a cheap beer, when Aunt Beatrice zeroed in on me. Beatrice is the kind of woman who smiles warmly while she slides a knife into your ribs. She is the ultimate manipulator, the family gossip who thrives on bringing others down. "Ethan, honey," Beatrice cooed loudly enough for the whole patio to hear, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. "Derek tells me you are still working at that same little office. Any chance of a promotion soon? You are pushing 35. You should be thinking about a 401k, maybe buying a little starter home instead of throwing your salary away on rent." My cousin Derek, who was currently on his 3rd failed startup, fully funded by his parents' retirement accounts, smirked from across the yard. "Yeah, Ethan, you still living in that shoebox downtown? Julian's out here looking at a beautiful 4-bedroom house for his new bride, and you are still eating takeout alone in a studio." I took a slow sip of my beer. I thought about the 4,000-square-foot penthouse I had recently purchased in cash. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire skyline. A private elevator that opened directly into my foyer. Italian marble counters that cost more than Derek's entire fabricated startup. It was a $2 million sanctuary that I had earned with my own blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. It was my fortress. "I am comfortable, Beatrice," I said evenly, keeping my face devoid of emotion. "My living situation suits me perfectly." My mother walked over, wiping her hands aggressively on an apron. "Oh, leave him be, Beatrice. Ethan lacks ambition. He always has. He does not have the drive that Julian does. Speaking of which, Ethan, did you remember to transfer the money for the caterer?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the confirmation screen. $50,000. I had quietly covered the entire catering and floral budget for Julian's wedding because my father claimed cash flow was tight at their company. My mother glanced at the screen, gave a curt nod without a single word of thanks, and walked away to check on the grill. I sat there listening to them endlessly praise Julian. Julian, who was supposedly stepping up to become a family man. They did not know that Julian had maxed out 3 credit cards and was on the verge of defaulting on a massive personal loan. I knew because my firm's risk assessment department ran background checks on everyone tied to my family as a standard security measure. Julian was drowning in debt, and my parents were completely blind to it. Later that evening, as people were leaving, I went into the house to grab my coat. The house was quiet, most guests still lingering outside in the warm evening air. As I passed my father's home office, the door was slightly ajar. I heard voices. It was my mother, my father, and Aunt Beatrice. "He will never agree to it privately," my father was saying, his voice strained and anxious. "Of course he will not," Aunt Beatrice replied smoothly, her tone dripping with venom. "Ethan is selfish. He always has been. He has no wife, no children, no future. What does a single man need with an apartment in the city? If Julian loses that house because of his temporary cash flow issues, Chloe's family will call off the wedding. It will be a massive scandal. But taking Ethan's apartment?" My father sounded hesitant, though not out of morality, but out of fear of logistics. "He pays rent there. We don't even know the landlord." "Arthur, please," my mother scoffed, dismissing his concerns. "He probably rents a dump. We will just tell him he has to give it up and move back home. Or better yet, we demand he signs over whatever lease he has to Julian. We tell him it is his duty as the older brother to provide a home for the newlyweds. We do it at the reception, during the toasts." "In front of everyone?" my father asked, the realization dawning on him. "Yes," my mother insisted, her voice sharp with malicious intent. "In front of 200 guests. He is terrified of public confrontation. He has no spine. If we put him on the spot with everyone watching and clapping, he will have to say yes. He will agree to pay the rent for Julian and Chloe. It solves everything." I stood in the dark hallway, my blood turning to absolute ice. They did not even know I owned a penthouse. They thought I rented a cheap apartment, and their brilliant master plan was to publicly ambush me into paying rent for my adult brother and his wife. They were going to weaponize my supposed weakness, my hatred of making a scene, to turn me into Julian's permanent financial slave. I stepped back silently. I did not storm into the room. I did not yell. I walked out the front door, walked 3 blocks to my Porsche, and got into the leather driver's seat. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My own mother, my own father, organizing a public execution of my independence to save their golden child. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. I requested the title deeds to my penthouse, my bank statements, and the corporate shareholder documents regarding my father's company. I made sure every single piece of paper was locked and loaded. I drove back to the city with a heart completely devoid of love for the people who raised me. The trap was set, but they had absolutely no idea who they were trying to catch. The morning of the wedding arrived with heavy gray clouds hanging ominously over the city, casting a pale, washed-out light through the windows of my penthouse. I stood in front of my floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting my tie. I chose a tailored black suit that cost more than the entire catering budget I had paid for, but its lack of flashy logos made it look standard to the untrained eye. I drove to the Grandview Hotel in a rented mid-level sedan, deliberately leaving the Porsche secured in my private underground garage. I wanted to play my part perfectly, the unassuming, quiet, unremarkable older brother. I walked into the grand lobby of the hotel, my footsteps echoing against the polished marble. The air smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. I made my way to the bridal suite to drop off a small, traditional gift for Chloe. The suite was an absolute hurricane of chaos. Hairspray hung in the air like a thick fog. Empty champagne flutes littered every available surface. Bridesmaids were running around in matching silk robes, looking frantic. My mother was standing in the center of the room, barking orders at a terrified-looking makeup artist. When she saw me step through the door, she stopped abruptly. Her eyes raked up and down my frame, her lips thinning into a line of deep disapproval. "Ethan, you could not buy a new suit for your brother's wedding? You look like you are going to a funeral," she sneered, making sure the bridesmaids heard her. "Good morning, Mother," I said calmly, ignoring the bait. It is a classic cut. Julian lounged on a velvet sofa in the corner, holding a mimosa. He wore a custom dark green velvet tuxedo jacket and a smug, entitled smile. Let him be, Mom. Not everyone has style. Hey Ethan, make sure you double-check the valet parking situation. I do not want my guests waiting when they pull up. He was treating me like hotel staff. I looked at Julian. I looked at the man who was 28 years old, deeply in debt, facing potential bankruptcy, and expecting me to fund his entire existence. I felt a cold detachment settle over me. The valet is handled, Julian. Focus on your vows, I said, placing the small gift box on a side table. I left the suite without another word and went down to the main ballroom to check the floral arrangements. The room was breathtaking. White roses cascaded from gold stands. Crystal chandeliers refracted light across the pristine dance floor. $50,000 of my money was staring back at me in the form of extravagant centerpieces and imported linens. Yet I was treated like a stray dog they had reluctantly let inside the house out of pity. As I walked near the massive head table, checking the name cards to ensure the seating chart was correct, I ran into Uncle Robert. Robert was my father's younger brother. Growing up, I had respected Robert. He was the only adult who occasionally asked about my career, the only one who seemed to view me as an independent person rather than just Julian's shadow. Ethan, my boy, Robert said, clapping me heavily on the shoulder. He was already holding a glass of scotch, despite it being only 11 in the morning. Big day for the family. It is, I agreed politely, offering a tight smile. Robert leaned in close, his breath smelling strongly of alcohol and mints. He looked around to make sure no one was listening. Listen, your dad told me about the little surprise for later. The housing arrangement. I kept my face perfectly blank, though my jaw clenched involuntarily. Did he? Yeah. Robert nodded solemnly, looking at me with what he probably thought was profound wisdom. It is a good thing you are doing, Ethan. Family legacy is everything in this world. Julian needs a solid foundation. You know how it is in real estate right now. Impossible for a young couple to get a foothold. You stepping up and giving him your place. It shows real maturity. It proves you finally understand the meaning of sacrifice. I stared at him. The betrayal stung far more than I expected it to. Robert knew. He knew about the ambush. He knew my parents were going to corner me, and he fully approved of it. He was validating their extortion under the guise of family loyalty. Sacrifice? I repeated the word slowly, tasting the bitter venom in it. And what exactly am I supposed to do, Robert? Live on the street. Robert chuckled, completely missing my cold, dead tone. Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. You make a decent salary. You can find a little studio somewhere further out in the suburbs. Julian is starting a family. You have to prioritize the bloodline. Besides, your parents are leaving the company to Julian eventually. Think of this as an investment in your own future inheritance. When Julian takes over, he will remember who helped him. Inheritance. The company. The mid-sized manufacturing supply firm that was currently struggling to secure raw materials because their primary financial backer was demanding higher profit margins and threatening to pull funding. I almost laughed out loud right there in the ballroom. Robert had no idea that the primary backer was Victor Sterling's firm. He had no idea that the executive managing their account, the man literally holding their company's throat in his hands, was standing right in front of him, being told to move into a suburban studio. I will keep that in mind, Robert, I said, stepping away from his toxic presence before I lost my temper. The ceremony itself went off without a hitch. Chloe looked beautiful, walking down the aisle in a stunning white gown, though she looked slightly terrified. Julian looked arrogant, standing at the altar like a king receiving his crown. My parents sat in the front row, weeping tears of joy for the photographers. I sat in the second row, perfectly still, watching the performance unfold. During the vows, I noticed Oliver, Chloe's younger brother, sitting a few seats down on the bride's side. Oliver was a notorious social media addict, a 20-something kid constantly vlogging and streaming every mundane moment of his life for his small audience of followers. He had his phone mounted on a small tripod, actively recording the vows. I watched the red recording light blink. I filed that piece of information away in my mind. It would become very important later. After the ceremony, the guests moved back to the ballroom for the reception. The tension in my gut was tight, pulling like a coiled spring ready to snap. I sat at a table near the back of the room, surrounded by distant cousins who completely ignored my existence, gossiping among themselves. The multi-course meal was served. The wine flowed freely. The noise level in the room rose steadily as people celebrated, clinking glasses and laughing. Then, the jazz band suddenly stopped playing mid-song. The main overhead lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the room. A single, bright spotlight hit the center of the dance floor. My father grabbed the microphone from the stand. He tapped it twice, the sound booming aggressively through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, if I could have your attention, please." The room fell completely silent. 200 faces turned toward my father. My mother stepped up to stand beside him, her face glowing with manufactured, picture-perfect maternal warmth. Julian and Chloe stood up from the head table, smiling brightly at the crowd. "Today, we celebrate the union of two wonderful people." My father began, his voice echoing through the massive room, thick with fake emotion. "Julian has always been the light of our lives. He is destined for greatness. But starting a new life is hard. Building a foundation takes support." I glanced over at the adjacent table. I saw Oliver. He had moved his phone tripod to the very center of his table, angling it perfectly to capture my father's speech. The red light was blinking continuously. He was live streaming the reception to his Facebook page. Perfect. The stage was set. "Family is about being there for each other," my father continued, his voice rising in volume. "It is about giving absolutely everything you have to ensure the next generation thrives. That is why Eleanor and I are so incredibly proud today. We want to announce a very special wedding gift. A gift that shows the true meaning of brotherhood." He paused for dramatic effect. He looked directly across the room, straight at me. Every single head in the room turned to follow his gaze. Suddenly, the spotlight shifted, blinding me for a second. I was the center of attention. "Ethan," my father called out into the microphone, his voice booming. "Stand up, son." I did not move. I sat perfectly still in my chair, staring back at him through the blinding light. "Come on, do not be shy." My father laughed, a nervous, forced sound, trying to play off my refusal to cooperate. "Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan has decided to make the ultimate sacrifice for his brother. Ethan has agreed to sign over his apartment in the city, transferring his lease and covering the rent entirely for the next 5 years, so Julian and Chloe can have the beautiful home they deserve." The room erupted into massive applause. People were cheering, whistling. Aunt Beatrice was standing up, wiping away a fake tear with a tissue. Julian was grinning from ear to ear, looking at me like he had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. Chloe looked slightly confused, clapping weakly, clearly unaware of the aggressive nature of this gift. My mother grabbed the microphone from my father's hand. "Stand up, Ethan. Show everyone what a good brother you are. Hand over the keys to Julian right now. We know you brought them." They had boxed me in perfectly. In their minds, I was a coward who would rather die than cause a public scene. They expected me to lower my head, walk up to the front like a beaten dog, hand over my keys, and accept my fate as their permanent financial servant. The applause continued, deafening, oppressive, heavy with expectation. I placed my linen napkin neatly on the table. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my suit jacket with deliberate precision. The applause began to die down slightly as people realized I was not smiling. I did not look like a generous brother. I looked like a man walking toward an execution, but I was absolutely certain I was not the one whose head was on the block. I stepped away from my table and began to walk past the seated guests. My footsteps were silent on the thick, luxurious carpet, but the heavy silence in the room made every movement feel amplified. The spotlight followed me, casting a stark white glow on my face. I stopped exactly 10 feet away from where my parents and Julian were standing on the edge of the dance floor. The silence in the room was now absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. 200 pairs of eyes were locked onto me, waiting for the heartwarming moment of brotherly sacrifice. "I need you to clarify something, Arthur," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was incredibly clear, cold, and it carried through the silent room without the need for a microphone. I refused to call him Dad. My father's forced smile faltered for a second, his brow furrowing. "What is there to clarify, Ethan? Give your brother the keys. Everyone is waiting." "You just told 200 people that I am signing over an apartment lease and paying rent," I said, my tone clinical, detached, like I was discussing a spreadsheet in a boardroom rather than my own life. "Is that what you genuinely think I have? A rented apartment?" My mother stepped forward, her face quickly flushing with intense irritation. She hated when things did not go exactly according to her script. "Stop playing games, Ethan. This is not about your pride. It is about Julian's future. Just give him the keys to your place. You can move back into your old bedroom at our house until you find another cheap rental. We are doing you a favor." A ripple of awkward, uncomfortable murmurs went through the crowd. The guests were starting to realize something was wrong. This was not the heartwarming family moment they had been promised. The tone was hostile. This was a shakedown playing out live in front of their dinner plates. "I don't rent, Eleanor," I said flatly, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "I own a $2 million penthouse on the 45th floor of the Sterling building. I paid for it in cash. The deed is entirely in my name, and I am absolutely not giving it to Julian." The gasp that went through the room was violent, like all the oxygen being sucked out of a vacuum. My father took a physical step back, his eyes widening in shock, looking as if I had just punched him directly in the stomach. Julian's smug, entitled grin vanished instantly, replaced by sheer, wide-eyed panic. $2 million. The number hung in the air above us like a heavy guillotine blade waiting to drop. You are lying," my mother stammered into the microphone, her voice shrill and shaking. "You don't have that kind of money. You are just a mid-level clerk. You process paperwork." "I am the Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Sterling Investment Group," I replied, my voice steady, cold, and utterly authoritative. "My base salary is mid-six figures, not including my annual performance bonuses. I bought that penthouse 3 months ago. I also paid $50,000 in cash to cover this exact wedding reception. The food everyone is eating, the flowers on the tables, because Arthur claimed the company was struggling and could not afford it." Another massive, collective gasp from the crowd. Whispers erupted like a wildfire. I looked at the VIP tables near the front of the room. Several of my father's most important business associates, including suppliers and local politicians, were sitting there. Their eyes were wide open in disbelief. They were actively processing the horrifying fact that their supposedly wealthy, successful associate was secretly taking massive financial handouts from his hidden millionaire son. "Shut up!" my father hissed aggressively. He tried to cover the microphone with his hand, but he was too slow. The sudden squeal of audio feedback pierced the room, making guests cover their ears, followed by his desperate, panicked whisper echoing through the speakers. "You are ruining the company's image." "No," I said, raising my voice just enough to command the entire ballroom, cutting through the murmurs. "You ruined your own image when you decided to use a wedding to publicly extort your oldest son. You knew Julian was in massive debt. You knew he couldn't afford a house, let alone a life. Instead of letting him face his own consequences, you planned a public ambush to force me to pay for his mistakes. You tried to trap me." Julian stepped forward, his face turning an ugly, mottled red with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You selfish prick. You have millions of dollars and you couldn't just give me one apartment? You are supposed to be my brother. You owe me." "I am your brother, Julian," I said, staring him down with absolute disgust. Not your trust fund. Not your ATM. You want a penthouse? Get a job that pays for one. That was the exact moment my mother snapped. The illusion of her perfect family, her perfect golden child, and her perfect life was shattering in real time. And worse, it was being broadcasted live on Oliver's phone to God knows how many people on the internet. Her mind could not handle the destruction of her carefully crafted reality. She dropped the microphone. It hit the marble floor with a deafening, metallic screech that made people flinch. She lunged forward, closing the distance between us in seconds. Her face contorted in absolute, primal fury. Before I could even register her sudden movement, her hand swung out in a wide arc crack. The slap echoed through the room with terrifying clarity. The sheer force of the impact snapped my head violently to the side. The metal frames of my designer glasses dug into the bridge of my nose before they flew off my face, flying through the air and shattering on the hard marble floor. The room erupted into genuine screams. Chloe covered her mouth in absolute horror, tears springing to her eyes. Uncle Robert stood up so fast, he knocked his heavy wooden chair backward onto the floor. My father froze completely, his mouth hanging open, realizing the catastrophic, unfixable mistake his wife had just made. Assaulting someone, assaulting her own son, in front of 200 witnesses, including key business partners. I stood there, the intense, fiery sting of the slap burning my left cheek. The physical pain was sharp, but the emotional pain I had carried for 34 years simply vanished, replaced by an icy, untouchable resolve. I looked down at my broken glasses. Then, I slowly turned my head and looked directly at my mother. "You should not have done that," I whispered. My voice was low, but I knew she could hear me. I saw the first flicker of genuine fear cross her eyes as she looked at my cold, emotionless face. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving them drowning in the chaos of their own making. I walked out to the hallway, leaving the screams and shouts behind the heavy doors, and made the call to Victor Sterling. The call that would bring the billionaire CEO to the hotel. The call that would initiate the ruthless, calculated corporate slaughter of my father's business. I stood outside the hotel doors, the cool night air soothing my burning cheek. I waited. The storm had broken, but the hurricane was just about to make landfall, and I was the one controlling the wind. I stood alone on the expansive concrete driveway outside the heavy glass doors of the Grandview Hotel. The biting evening wind whipped against my face, cutting through the expensive fabric of my suit, but I barely registered the cold. The burning sensation on my left cheek had slowly faded into a dull, relentless throb. It was a physical reminder of the boundary that had just been permanently destroyed. I watched the valet attendant nervously approach me. He was a young kid, maybe 20 years old, holding out the keys to my rented sedan with a trembling hand. He had clearly seen my red face and the broken glasses when I walked out. I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. I told him to keep the car parked and the engine off. I was not leaving. Not yet. I had promised Victor Sterling an hour, and I knew Victor was a man who operated on exact, unwavering schedules. I leaned against a stone pillar near the entrance, folding my arms across my chest. Inside that grand ballroom, I could only begin to imagine the sheer panic and frantic damage control taking place. My father, Arthur, was undoubtedly scrambling to regain control of the narrative. I pictured him smoothing down his tie, pasting on that fake, jovial smile he reserved for country club meetings, and spinning a pathetic web of lies to his business partners. He would probably tell Mr. Henderson and the other suppliers that my outburst was just the result of a long-standing mental health struggle, a tragic flaw in an otherwise perfect family. My mother, Eleanor, was likely playing the ultimate victim. I could envision her sitting in a velvet chair, sobbing delicately into a monogrammed silk handkerchief, claiming the overwhelming stress of the wedding preparations had simply caused her to snap. They thought the worst of the scandal was over. They thought they had survived the embarrassment of my public defiance. They believed that by driving me out of the room, they had won the battle of wills. They were completely, hilariously oblivious to the financial and legal hurricane that was currently speeding down the interstate in the form of a black armored Maybach. Exactly 47 minutes after I walked out of that ballroom, the sleek luxury vehicle pulled into the hotel's circular driveway. The heavy tires crunched quietly against the decorative gravel. The driver, a towering man in a sharp black suit, stepped out instantly, walking briskly around the hood to open the rear passenger door. Victor Sterling stepped out into the night. Victor was a man who radiated absolute, terrifying authority. He was in his late 50s, his silver hair impeccably styled, wearing a bespoke navy pinstripe suit that projected nothing but raw power and corporate dominance. He did not walk. He marched, commanding the physical space around him simply by existing. Right behind him was James, the head of our corporate litigation department. James was a man who tore apart multi-million-dollar corporations for sport before breakfast. He was holding a thick, heavy leather-bound briefcase that contained enough legal ammunition to level a small city. Seeing the two of them standing under the bright, artificial lights of the hotel awning, I felt a deep, profound sense of vindication wash over me. Victor approached me. His sharp, calculating eyes immediately locked onto the angry red handprint blooming across my face. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer empty sympathy or platitudes. He simply looked at the physical evidence of my family's betrayal, his jaw tightening so hard I could see the muscle ticking in his cheek. "Are you ready to end this, Ethan?" Victor asked. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble, the sound of a predator spotting its prey. "I have been ready for 10 years, I replied smoothly. We walked back into the hotel together. We were a united front of corporate executioners, moving with a singular, devastating purpose. The grand lobby was quiet, the distant sound of panicked voices and arguing echoing from the long hallway leading to the ballroom. We walked down the corridor, our footsteps synchronized. 2 hotel security guards were standing near the double doors, looking completely overwhelmed and unsure of what to do. When they saw Victor Sterling walking toward them, flanked by a towering litigation lawyer and a senior executive with a bruised face, their survival instincts kicked in. They wisely stepped aside, grabbed the brass handles, and pulled the heavy wooden doors open for us without saying a single word. We stepped into the ballroom. The scene was absolute, unmitigated chaos. The expensive jazz band had packed up their brass instruments and fled the stage, leaving behind empty chairs and silent microphones. Half of the guests were standing up, wandering between tables, whispering frantically, pointing fingers, and furiously checking their phones. I realized instantly that Oliver's live stream had not been turned off. The video had clearly gone viral within our extended social circles and the local business community. At the head table, the illusion of the happy couple was completely shattered. Julian was arguing loudly with Chloe. He was waving his arms, his face red and sweaty. Chloe was sitting in her massive white gown, crying silently into her hands, looking absolutely terrified of the family she had just married into. My father was standing at the front of the room near the stage, still holding a microphone. He was desperately trying to reassure Mr. Henderson and the other VIP business associates who had gathered near the exit, demanding explanations. My mother was sitting in a chair at the center of the dance floor, fanning herself aggressively with a dinner menu, completely surrounded by Aunt Beatrice and her chorus of sycophants who were whispering words of comfort. The moment my leather shoes hit the polished wood of the dance floor, the murmurs began to die down. One by one, 200 faces turned to look at the entrance. The silence spread through the room like a wave of freezing water. My father saw me first. His eyes widened, and his face flushed with a sudden, renewed burst of arrogant anger. His ego was so massive, so blinding, that he genuinely misinterpreted the situation. He saw me standing there without my glasses, a red mark on my face, and he assumed I had come back to surrender. He thought the obedient, cowardly Ethan had returned to beg for forgiveness. He thought I was going to hand over the keys to the real estate to avoid further conflict and protect my inheritance. He raised the microphone, a condescending, victorious smirk starting to form on his lips. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems Ethan has finally come to his senses. My father announced to the crowd, his voice dripping with unbearable arrogance. He realized the importance of family loyalty. He knows he owes us an apology for his little outburst. He was so blinded by his own narcissism that he did not even recognize the billionaire standing right next to me. Victor did not wait for an invitation. He did not ask for permission to speak. He walked straight past me, crossing the dance floor with long, confident strides that commanded absolute attention. James followed closely behind, the metal clasps of his heavy briefcase catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. My father's smirk vanished entirely as Victor approached him. The sheer, overwhelming presence of the man made my father instinctively shrink back. Victor reached out and took the microphone directly out of my father's hand. My father was so intimidated, so completely outclassed, that he did not even try to hold on to it. He just let it go. Victor tapped the microphone once. The sharp sound echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. "My name is Victor Sterling," he said. His voice was calm, measured, and completely devoid of warmth, carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Investment Group, and I am here to correct a severe, highly damaging misunderstanding regarding my Senior Vice President of Acquisitions, Ethan Vance." The name dropped like an atomic bomb in the center of the room. Sterling Investment Group. Everyone in the business world knew that name. It was the financial titan of the city, a corporate behemoth that bought and sold companies like my father's for spare change. Mr. Henderson, standing near the exit, suddenly stood perfectly straight, his face draining of all color. He knew exactly who Victor was, and he knew that Victor Sterling did not show up to suburban weddings unless someone was about to be destroyed. "A few minutes ago," Victor continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room, scanning the terrified faces of my family, "Arthur Vance attempted to publicly extort his son for a $2 million real estate asset. Following that pathetic display, Eleanor Vance committed a documented act of physical assault against a senior executive of my firm. All of this was broadcasted live on social media, creating a highly volatile liability." My mother stood up from her chair, her face pale, her hands trembling so violently she dropped the menu she was holding. "This is a private family matter. You have no right to come in here and interfere with our family. You need to leave right now. It ceased being a private family matter the moment you attempted to steal corporate-linked assets, Eleanor." Victor countered smoothly, his gaze pinning her to the spot like a butterfly on a corkboard. "The penthouse Ethan purchased was partially funded through a specialized executive retention bonus structured by my firm. That makes it our business. But more importantly, you seem to have a severe, almost comical lack of understanding regarding who actually feeds you." Victor turned his attention directly to my father. Arthur was sweating profusely, the moisture glistening on his forehead under the stage lights. His hands were shaking at his sides. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, waiting for the lever to be pulled. "Arthur," Victor said, his tone turning razor-sharp, "your manufacturing supply company has been operating on a massive line of credit for the past 3 years. A line of credit provided by the commercial lending arm of Sterling Investment Group. Without that funding, you cannot purchase raw materials. Without those materials, you cannot fulfill your contracts. Without those contracts, your company goes into Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 30 days. Your employees lose their salary. Your entire life's work goes up in smoke." The entire ballroom gasped in unison. The wealthy, successful, untouchable facade of the Vance family was being stripped away, layer by agonizing layer, exposing the rotting, debt-ridden foundation underneath. "You have been desperately trying to secure a lower interest rate and a vital extension on that credit line for 6 months," Victor stated, projecting his voice so every single guest, every single business partner, could hear the humiliating truth. "You have been sending endless, begging emails, requesting a meeting with the senior executive managing your portfolio. You claimed your company was highly profitable and stable, despite the fact that you just tried to force your oldest son to pay your youngest son's rent. My father swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking at his horrified business partners. He was watching his reputation burn to the ground. "Mr. Sterling, please. I beg you. We can discuss this in my office on Monday. This is my son's wedding. This is not the time or the place for a lawsuit or a financial review." "We will not be discussing anything on Monday, Arthur," Victor replied coldly, devoid of any mercy. "Because I do not manage your account. I do not review your financial statements. I do not approve your funding extensions. The man who holds the absolute power of life and death over your entire company is standing right there." Victor pointed a single, perfectly manicured finger directly at me. Every head in the room swiveled in my direction. The silence was so profound it was almost deafening. "Ethan Vance is the executive managing the commercial lending portfolio," Victor revealed to the paralyzed crowd. "Every single dollar that flows into your business, Arthur, requires his signature. He has been quietly, generously keeping your sinking ship afloat out of a misplaced sense of loyalty. And tonight, you decided to repay him by trying to steal his home and allowing your wife to strike him across the face." The realization hit my father like a physical blow to the chest. His knees actually buckled slightly. He reached out to grab the edge of the head table to steady himself, knocking over a crystal champagne flute. It shattered on the floor, but nobody moved. The man he had ignored, the son he had belittled, the child he had deemed a complete failure, was the very architect of his financial survival. He had just publicly humiliated and assaulted the one person who could destroy his entire legacy with a single stroke of a pen. The ballroom was completely paralyzed by the revelation. I watched my mother slowly sink back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. Her brain simply could not process the data being presented to her. Her entire worldview, the fundamental, unshakable belief that Julian was the successful golden child destined for greatness, and I was the pathetic, invisible loser, had just been violently demolished. Julian himself was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The smug, entitled arrogance that had defined his entire existence was completely gone, replaced by the stark, horrifying realization that his easy ride through life had just hit an impenetrable brick wall. James, the corporate lawyer, stepped forward. He unlatched the brass locks of his leather briefcase with 2 sharp clicks. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed stack of legal documents. He handed them to Victor with practiced efficiency. "Arthur," Victor said, holding up the documents so the entire room could see the official corporate seals. "When you signed the commercial lending agreement with Sterling Investment Group 5 years ago, you signed a standard corporate morality clause. Page 42, Section 4, Paragraph 2. I highly doubt you read it. It explicitly states that the borrower must not engage in any public conduct that could bring disrepute, scandal, criminal liability, or negative media attention to the lender, its subsidiaries, or its executives." Victor paused, letting the heavy, suffocating legal reality sink into my father's terrified mind. "Tonight, you and your wife orchestrated a public extortion attempt. You attempted to seize real estate through intimidation. Following that, Eleanor committed a documented act of physical assault against a senior vice president of our firm. The video of this incident is currently circulating on multiple platforms. We already have a dedicated team archiving the footage. You have unequivocally, undeniably breached the morality clause." "No, no, no," my father stammered, stumbling forward, his hands raised in a gesture of desperate surrender. The proud patriarch was entirely gone. "Mr. Sterling, Ethan, please. You have to listen to me. We were just joking. It was a misunderstanding. Terrible, terrible joke that went too far. Eleanor was just emotional because of the wedding stress. We did not mean any of it. Ethan knows we love him. Tell him, Ethan. Tell him we love you." It was the most pathetic display of cowardice I had ever witnessed in my entire life. The great Arthur Vance, begging for mercy in front of his entire social circle, trying to gaslight me into saving his company. I am officially executing the breach of contract protocol, Victor announced, his voice slicing through my father's pleas. As of 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, your entire line of credit is frozen. You will not be able to draw a single penny to pay your suppliers, your employees, or your own executive salary. You are effectively cut off from the global financial system. You are bankrupting us? My mother shrieked from her chair, suddenly finding her voice again. She jumped to her feet and pointed a shaking, accusing finger directly at me. Ethan, do something. We are your family. You cannot let this man do this to us. You owe us. We gave you life. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd parted slightly, giving me a clear path to the dance floor. I looked at the woman who had struck me. I looked at the woman who had demanded my home to fund her favorite son's lifestyle. I looked at the woman who had spent 34 years making me feel completely worthless, actively destroying my self-esteem to build up her golden child. I am not doing anything to you, Eleanor, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor blade. It was the first time I had ever spoken to her with absolute, unfiltered authority. You did this to yourselves. You built this trap, you baited it with your own greed, and you stepped right into it while the cameras were rolling. I am just locking the door. However, Victor interjected, holding up a single finger to command silence. Sterling Investment Group prefers to avoid the messy, public optics of a sudden corporate bankruptcy. It is bad for market stability. Therefore, we are offering you one final, non-negotiable ultimatum, Arthur. You have exactly 48 hours to issue a comprehensive public apology to Ethan. It must be a video statement, and it will be distributed to every single person in this room and your entire client list. My father let out a choked gasp. You will admit to your financial manipulation, Victor dictated, listing the terms like a judge handing down a sentence. You will apologize for the public extortion attempt regarding the real estate, and Eleanor will explicitly apologize for the unprovoked physical assault. If you do this, we will transition your account to a standard high-risk portfolio instead of freezing it entirely. The interest rates will triple, but you will survive. A public apology? My father whispered, the remaining blood completely draining from his face. He looked physically ill. In front of everyone, my business partners, my country club, my entire network. It is either your pride or your company, Arthur, Victor said coldly, handing the legal documents to James. Choose wisely. The clock starts now. Mr. Henderson, the most vital supplier for my father's business, stood up from his VIP table. He buttoned his expensive suit jacket, a look of profound, sickening disgust etched across his face. He looked at my father, shaking his head slowly. I came here tonight to celebrate your family, Arthur, Mr. Henderson said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. I brought a generous gift. Instead, I witnessed a disgusting, horrifying display of greed and abuse. My firm does not do business with men who extort their own children to fund their failures. Consider our upcoming distribution contract fully terminated. Expect a letter from my lawyer on Monday regarding the dissolution of our partnership. Mr. Henderson turned and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Within seconds, 2 other prominent business owners stood up, gathered their wives, and followed him out the door. My father watched his livelihood, his legacy, and his retirement literally walking out the door, and he could not do a single thing to stop it. He was paralyzed by the consequences of his own actions. I walked toward the head table, stopping just a few feet away from my brother. Julian shrank back, pulling Chloe with him as if I were going to physically attack him. He looked like a frightened, pathetic child. The customized, expensive velvet tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume on a boy pretending to be a man. Ethan, Julian whispered, his voice cracking with genuine terror. Come on, man. I am your brother. I need that house. I need help. You know I am struggling. You need to grow up, Julian, I said, my voice steady and devoid of any brotherly affection. You are 28 years old. You are drowning in credit card debt. You have a massive personal loan you cannot pay. And instead of getting a job, instead of working hard and taking responsibility for your own life, you stood up here and smiled while our parents tried to steal my home to bail you out. You are a parasite. I turned away from him and looked at my parents. They were both staring at me, completely broken, completely exposed to the harsh light of reality. The shiny, perfect veneer of the wealthy suburban family was shattered into a million unfixable pieces. For 34 years, I said, addressing them for the very last time, projecting my voice so everyone could hear the absolute finality in my tone. I tried to be the perfect son. I paid for my own college fund when you stole it. I built my own career from the ground up. I paid for the food your guests are eating right now. I asked for nothing but basic, fundamental human respect. But you are fundamentally incapable of giving it. You look at me and you only see a resource to be exploited. I reached into the breast pocket of my suit. I pulled out the shattered, twisted remains of my Tom Ford glasses. I tossed them onto the pristine white tablecloth in front of my mother. The broken metal clattered loudly against the fine crystal glassware. Keep the broken pieces, Eleanor, I said, my eyes locking onto hers. It is the last thing you will ever get from me. I am no longer your son. I am no longer part of this family. Do not call me. Do not email me. Do not show up at my office. If you ever come near my building, I will have my security team arrest you for trespassing, and I will personally file a lawsuit for harassment. I turned my back on them for the final time. I walked across the dance floor, my footsteps confident, heavy, and steady. Victor and James fell into step beside me, flanking me like guards. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a profound, devastating silence broken only by the sound of my mother finally, truly beginning to weep. We walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air. I thanked Victor for his flawless execution and unwavering support. He placed a firm hand on my shoulder, gave a nod of deep respect, and got into the back of his Maybach. I watched the luxury car disappear into the heavy city traffic. I pulled out my phone and called a premium ride service. I directed the driver to the Walmart parking lot 3 blocks away. When I reached my car, I unlocked the doors and slid into the driver's seat of the Porsche 911. The rich, familiar scent of expensive leather surrounded me, a stark contrast to the toxic atmosphere I had just escaped. I gripped the steering wheel, running my thumbs over the smooth, flawless stitching. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful growl that resonated in my chest, shaking my bones. I drove out of the parking lot and onto the highway, heading back to the glowing city skyline. I rolled the windows down, letting the freezing cold air rush in, clearing my lungs. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely, unconditionally free. 6 months have passed since that disastrous wedding reception. 6 months of absolute silence from my end, and 6 months of utter devastation on theirs. The fallout from that night was swift, brutal, and entirely deserved. Exactly 47 hours after Victor Sterling issued his uncompromising ultimatum, an email was sent to every single guest who had attended the wedding, as well as the local business chamber of commerce and the regional supplier network. The email contained a high-definition video file. In the video, my father and mother sat stiffly on their expensive living room sofa. They looked completely exhausted, deeply humiliated, and utterly defeated. The bags under their eyes were dark and heavy. My father held a piece of paper in his shaking hands. He read a carefully prepared, legally approved statement, officially apologizing to me for his egregious attempt to manipulate my personal finances and extort my real estate. My mother, looking like she was physically chewing on broken glass, issued a forced, strained apology for her unprovoked physical assault. She could barely look at the camera. The video met the legal requirements. It was enough to stop Victor from entirely freezing their credit line and forcing immediate bankruptcy, but the damage to their reputation in the community was irreversible. The business world is a tight-knit circle built entirely on trust, reliability, and perception. My father had publicly demonstrated that he was a desperate, unethical man willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood for a quick payout. Within 2 months of the video circulating, 3 more major suppliers pulled their lucrative contracts, vaguely citing changing business priorities and restructuring. Arthur's manufacturing firm, once the pride of the family, was forced to downsize by a staggering 80%. He had to lay off half his loyal staff. He was forced to slash his own executive salary just to keep the lights on. He had to sell both of his luxury cars, downgrade to a cheap lease, and ultimately remortgage the massive suburban house just to make payroll. The golden years of his retirement, the wealthy lifestyle he had lorded over me, were entirely wiped out. But the most spectacular, satisfying collapse belonged to Julian. The truth has a very funny way of clawing its way to the surface when the money finally runs out. Without the $2 million penthouse to fall back on as a magical safety net, Julian's entire house of cards collapsed entirely. Chloe's family, who had been completely horrified and disgusted by the events at the reception, forced a deep, forensic dive into Julian's personal finances before they would agree to help the newlyweds secure a mortgage for a starter home. What they found was absolutely catastrophic. Julian was not just bad at basic budgeting. He was a severe, toxic financial liability. He owed tens of thousands of dollars to multiple high-interest credit cards, fueled by years of failed cryptocurrency investments, expensive vacations he couldn't afford, and illegal online sports betting. He had been borrowing money from shady online payday lenders just to cover his tracks and maintain the illusion of success. The twisted, sickening reality of the penthouse ambush finally made perfect sense. Julian never intended to actually live in my penthouse with his new bride. He wanted the physical deed in his name so he could immediately leverage the asset, taking out a massive, high-interest mortgage against my unencumbered property to pay off his gambling debts and keep the loan sharks from breaking his legs. He was fully prepared to risk my home, my sanctuary, to save his own skin, and my parents were perfectly willing to let him do it because he was the golden child. Chloe filed for an annulment exactly 84 days after the wedding ceremony. She packed her bags while he was out, moved back in with her parents, and hired a ruthless lawyer. Julian was left entirely alone. He was drowning in debt, completely abandoned by his wealthy in-laws, and working a miserable, low-paying entry-level sales job just to keep the aggressive collection agencies from suing him for wage garnishment. 2 weeks ago, my secured corporate email pinged with a message from an unrecognized, encrypted address. It managed to bypass the strict spam filter Liam had set up. I opened it cautiously. It was a long, desperate, rambling message from Julian. "Ethan, please. I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. I know I messed up. But I am going to lose absolutely everything. They are threatening to garnish my wages. Mom and Dad cannot help me. Their business is barely surviving the month. I just need a small loan. Just $50,000 to get them off my back. You spent that on the wedding flowers without blinking. Please, Ethan, be my brother. Have some mercy. Help me." I sat in my luxurious corner office at Sterling Investment Group, looking at the glowing screen. I searched my heart for a reaction. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no lingering anger, no familial guilt. Just a profound, empty sense of indifference. I highlighted the text, forwarded the email directly to our legal department with a simple, one-line instruction: draft a formal cease and desist order regarding targeted harassment. Then, I picked up my office phone and called Sarah, the head of security for my penthouse building. I gave her strict, unbreakable, permanent orders. If anyone sharing my last name or anyone matching Julian's description ever appeared in the marble lobby, she was to immediately call the police, press criminal charges for trespassing, and notify my legal team. I permanently deleted the email from my inbox, emptied the trash folder, and went back to reviewing a highly profitable multimillion-dollar corporate acquisition file. I had excised the cancerous tumor from my life, and the patient was fully, completely recovered. This morning, I woke up naturally at 6 o'clock, just as the early sun was beginning to rise over the sleeping city. I walked into my massive, open-concept kitchen, the cool marble floors soothing against my bare feet. I made myself a slow pour-over coffee, enjoying the rich, bitter aroma. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, holding the warm ceramic mug in both hands, looking out at the sprawling, infinite skyline below. The city was slowly waking up, a million tiny lights blinking against the soft pink dawn. I looked at the faint reflection of my face in the thick glass. The angry red mark on my cheek is long gone, of course. I bought a brand new pair of glasses, a sleek, modern titanium frame that suits my face much better anyway. But the internal, psychological changes are what truly matter. For the very first time in my entire adult life, I am not carrying the crushing, invisible, suffocating weight of trying to be good enough for people who were absolutely determined to misunderstand and belittle me. I am no longer exhausting myself trying to prove my inherent worth to a father who only values blind subservience, or a mother who only loves the child she can manipulate and control. My penthouse is not just a piece of expensive real estate or a status symbol to flex at high school reunions. It is my fortress of solitude. It is a physical, undeniable manifestation of my hard work, my resilience, and my ultimate independence. It is a sacred place where no one can demand anything from me. I have realized, through fire and pain, that family is not defined by blood, shared genetics, or a common last name. DNA is just a biological coincidence. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine, unconditional care. I found my real family in the people who actually stood by me when the storm hit. Victor Sterling is not just my billionaire boss. He is the supportive father figure I always needed but never had. He is a man who judges me solely by my actions, my integrity, and my professional results. Liam, my brilliant executive assistant, is more of a loyal brother to me than Julian ever was or ever could be. When I officially secured the promotion to senior vice president last month, complete with a massive stock option package, Liam was the very first person to congratulate me. He was genuinely thrilled for my success, without a single ounce of toxic jealousy or resentment. Last Thanksgiving, I did not sit at a tense, hostile suburban dining table eating dry turkey while being mocked by Aunt Beatrice and Cousin Derek. Instead, Victor invited me to his sprawling private estate in the Hamptons. We drank incredibly expensive, aged wine, smoked premium cigars on the heated stone terrace overlooking the ocean, and talked for hours about the future of the global financial market. His wife and 2 college-age children treated me with immense warmth, intellectual curiosity, and absolute respect. I belonged there. I had earned my seat at that table through merit, not through forced blood ties. If you are listening to this right now, and you are trapped in a toxic, suffocating family dynamic, I want you to hear this loud and clear. Burn these words into your mind. You do not owe your abusers your success. You do not owe them your hard-earned finances, your peace of mind, your college fund, your promotion, or your future, simply because you share a last name or a childhood home. The concept of family loyalty is almost always weaponized by toxic, narcissistic parents to turn successful, independent children into permanent financial safety nets for their own miserable failures. They will try to guilt you. They will call you selfish. They will call you ungrateful. They will threaten a lawsuit. They will demand custody of your time. They will threaten to exclude you from a worthless inheritance. And they will try to publicly humiliate you to force you back into a state of submission. Let them throw their pathetic tantrums. Let them play the victim at every funeral and family gathering. Your only responsibility in this world is to protect your own peace, guard your own assets, and maintain your own dignity. Set the boundary, build your fortress, hire a good lawyer if you have to, and lock the heavy door behind you. The guilt that society programs into you will fade, I promise you. And what replaces that guilt is a level of profound, untouchable freedom you cannot even begin to imagine. I am Ethan Vance. I am a self-made man, a senior vice president, a survivor of domestic extortion, and I am finally, completely at peace with who I am. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I know it was intense and I know it covered some very dark territory, but I hope it serves as a powerful reminder that your value is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. You have the absolute power to walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut ties with relatives who only saw you as a resource rather than a human being? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.